All right, hello and welcome. Thank you everyone for being here. My name is Szymon, and as Brian may have mentioned, I like cacti. And I never consider myself someone capable of specializing in any one thing, but when it comes to plants, it turns out that not only do I like one particular group of plants more than others. I like within that group, I like some plants more than others too. And I've realized that this is mainly because I tend to like and be more interested in things that I have gotten to know better, I guess. And it's mostly through getting to know their habitat, their adaptations, their strengths and weaknesses, and going into their habitat, taking pictures and exploring definitely helps with that. So definitely with that in-depth understanding where they grow, why, and how. And since I've always been interested in desert, fascinated by them, they're kind of an alien concept to me still. Almost like a place that shouldn't really exist. It's kind of a Martian landscape in some places. Going to the most extreme, one of the oldest and the driest desert on Earth, it was definitely on my bucket list because I expected to see some extreme adaptations stemming from that extreme environment. So my wife and I decided to fly to Chile, and I can only assume that she must love me very much because she agreed to drive 1,500 miles along the coast of Chile, north to Iquique to see one specific species of cactus. So the whole trip, you basically just start in San Diego. That's the easiest place to get to. And from there, we rented a car and basically just drove from place to place, previously booked hotels and whatnot. And this was our trip, the beginning. So just to a little bit about Chile. It's a narrow and long strip of land with very diverse climate types, many of them, in fact. We went to the northern part of Chile, which is the driest. That's what I'm interested in. So further south, it's obviously a little wetter and cooler. But the driest part on Earth is somewhere here in the Atacama region. So surprisingly, there's actually quite a few similarities between Chile and California. Don't get me wrong, there's obviously massive differences. One is a country, the other is just a state. But even, I'm not even talking about both pieces of land being narrow strips, narrow and long, because those are just lines, artificial lines drawn on the map by people. I'm talking mostly about the fact that in both cases, we are on the West Coast, subjected to similar cold ocean currents, which create certain natural phenomena. And both places, along a significant portion of their coastline, they have coastal ranges of mountains, which basically act as like the first barrier for the moisture trying to make its way inland. And beyond those mountains, we have central valleys, and they even call it Central Valley in Chile as well. Beyond the Central Valley, in both cases, again, we have very high mountains. So very similar forces to different degrees, but nevertheless, we have those similar forces creating similar habitats and different microclimates. And if you, fog is a very, frequent and reliable occurrence when it has its name. And you all probably know Carl the Fog of San Francisco. Here it is up here, and there's such a vast amount of moisture in the air that it actually supports some of the tallest trees on the planet. And similarly, in Chile, we also have very reliable, less and less so now due to the climate change, but still, fog called Camanchaca. And here we have it rolling through a narrow saddle. So this is from the west side behind the coastal ranges. And you can see how it's actually creeped kind of through to the other side. And here on the lowermost picture, we can see even some trees growing on top of this hill and almost absolutely nothing lower down, which means it's presumably enough to support trees on top of this hill, but not much where the fog disappears. So that kind of illustrates how important that fog is. It's important to other plants too. So this is just to show you exactly where we are. We started from Santiago de Chile, which is, I believe, somewhere here, if I remember correctly. And from there, we drove to our first stop, Coquimbo, La Serena. And our first cacti on our way, Eulychnia acida, with its holoparasitic, it hosts this parasite, Tristerix aphyllus, which, as the name implies, has no leaves, but in fact it doesn't have much of anything really. The whole plant is hidden under the epidermis of its hosts, which in this case is the cactus, and it only pokes out when it flowers. That's the only visible part of this plant. The whole life cycle is just done hidden under the epidermis of its host. So after the flowers, the fruits appear, birds fly over, eat the fruits, land on another cactus, poop the seeds out, and the seeds are kind of coated in that sticky substance, which lets them adhere to the epidermis. The seeds germinate under the right circumstances, penetrate through the epidermis again, and the life cycle begins again. And this Eulychnia acida in that area is actually it's abundant, it's everywhere. People, I think they grow them specifically for that, kind of like hedges to delineate their, the property lines essentially. And you can see how, what proportion of the population here is infected or infested by the parasite here, which is probably like 30% of the cacti there, but it doesn't seem to do a significant damage. I haven't seen any signs of, so-called unhappiness on the cacti. So I guess under the right circumstances, it doesn't really kill the host. It just takes a little bit of the resources, and they both live happily ever after. So from there, we moved a little bit inland to Copiapó, and you may recognize that this is the place after which the genus Copiapoa was named, but not after the city itself, after the region, because the city itself is far enough inland, 38 miles or so from the coast, that you can see this is early in the morning, 9:43 a.m., and the fog, or in this case, you can call them those clouds, essentially, are so high up that none of this moisture is available to the plants. People try growing things there because it's a mining city. It's actually pretty large for, Atacama standards. They do have some aqueducts, they do have some aquifers, and it's a city. There are people, there are plants growing, but in terms of cacti, not a very interesting place. It's just a stop along the way because distances are so vast that we basically just had to stop, and it was such an iconic city as well when it comes to its name and Copiapó, that we thought it was worth visiting as well. There were some cacti there, but mostly Eulychnias. So even that far inland, apparently there appears to be enough moisture for them. But here we are a little further north, Pan de Azúcar National Park in the Atacama region. And this is actually, I should mention that one of few national parks available for the tourists at any given time. Like, doesn't matter what time you show up, you can go in there, there's no gates. And unfortunately, most of the national parks in Chile, unfortunately, because no one talks about this, and it's a very difficult piece of information to obtain, most of those national parks appear to be closed for the majority of the week. So let's say, you know, in the height of the tourist season, the parks are open from Monday to Thursday. And we were there outside of the season, which meant the parks were only open from Monday to Wednesday. So if you're there, you know, on a Thursday or Friday or whatever, you're out of luck. And the parks are literally just like locked. There is a gate, you can't go in. So this was, we were fortunate that this didn't have any gates. And it's a big park, a beautiful park, and lots of cacti. So this is just to illustrate or show you my process of identifying these plants, because it becomes really difficult when you're dealing with something like this. I've actually grown this species from seed, but there is no way I could ever tell what this is, because this plant is so, it's frankly pretty decrepit and beat up by the elements. So it's hard to expect to see something like this in cultivation. Even if you find a specimen this old, it's probably not going to look like this. So it makes it a little tricky to identify plants in a habitat. Fortunately, as it turns out, there is no overlapping species here. So there's only one occurring in this area, which is Eulychnia breviflora. There's a typo here, but it's supposed to be breviflora, and that must be it. And this is a little larger, better looking specimen in its native habitat. Here we have a very nice specimen of Copiopoa cinerescens. I'm not sure exactly what's going on here with this wool. Normally, most cacti have some woolly apical meristem, but this is way more than I would ever expect a plant of this size to contain in there. But, you know, maybe the key to this mystery is that frass, or the insect poop, coming out of the wool. So I've read about some borer beetles that feed on Copiopoas, and I suspect that this must be its job. Here to the right, we have a somewhat symbiotic, you might say, species of insect. It's a hoverfly that apparently pollinates a lot of Copiopoa flowers. And we were fortunate enough to see some of those plants flowering. And another beautiful example, and I also suspect that the beetle is doing something here as well. And again, like I mentioned, sometimes you'll see the time here. This is just to show you, because I was trying to make notes for myself, temperature and time. And when you look around, it's actually pretty cloudy and foggy. It's not very far from the ocean. You can see the ocean out there. This is Copiopoa cinerea, pretty old specimen. Columna alba. I don't have a horse in this race, so I'm just going to go with the nomenclature I found people using most often, but it may be wrong, it may be outdated at this point. Nevertheless, it's 2:55 p.m., which means almost 3 p.m. It's only 73 degrees Fahrenheit, and it's cloudy. There is no signs of sun yet. The fog is still almost touching the ground, which means that even though this is a very dry area, it's never very hot, and at the same time, it can be pretty cloudy for a significant portion of the day, which definitely moderates the harshness of this climate. And here we have another one. This is probably trying to flower, something munched on it. A beautiful specimen again, which some people would call unispina, because it only has one spine per areole, until it doesn't. So sometimes they have two, sometimes they have three, and you can see them all, on one and the same plant. So I'm not sure if this really deserves the title of a variety necessarily. Maybe it's just a natural variation. And this plant is not very, for a Copiopoa in habitat standards, this plant probably isn't as old as the previous one, but it may still be decades old. It's just small. Here we have a beautiful example of the cracked up and thick black sea coating or farina. And I've seen quite a few studies or speculations on what this actually does for the plant. The speculations ranging from anything from UV protection, which makes sense, limitation of water loss, which also makes sense, and also potentially collecting that moisture from the air. But people try to replicate some of those, and sometimes it works, sometimes it doesn't. So the way I understand it is that we still don't really know what this does. Intuitively, I would agree that it definitely limits evaporation and it definitely protects the plant from the harsh UV. That's what it feels like to me, but we haven't really proved it yet. And this, to answer the question how big the Copiopoa cinerea can get, it gets pretty big. I'm not sure if this meristem is damaged, and that's why it pushed those pups, making it kind of a wonky snowman. But it definitely grows some arms, and it was probably the largest, if not the oldest, Copiopoa in that area. This, again, it's small, maybe a couple inches across, but it doesn't mean it's very young. I mean, it's young for Copiopoa standards, but again, it's very difficult, almost impossible to age cacti. They don't produce rings, so we can only guess that this could be 20 years old. Who knows? But it's always nice to see a recruitment of new plants, especially in such marginal habitat. And here we have an example of a nice natural plantation just on the edge of the ocean. And this very well illustrates the difficulty of identifying species in natural habitat, because there's very little to go by, especially if you're not, like myself, very experienced with identifying Copiopoas. This is the first time I ever saw them in habitat. They look very different, often very different from what I ever saw in cultivation. But my best guess is that this is Copiopoa grandiflora. And something that is not a cactus for a change, guanaco, we saw there. And it's kind of a surprise, because such a harsh and dry environment, how does that support a large animal like this? This is the size of a small horse, after all. But it's not all dry. There are permanent springs and areas with brackish water. This was definitely brackish water. I saw some salt-tolerant plants growing in there. We saw some white crust. And I may have even tasted the water and it was salty. So it's probably good enough for the guanaco. That's why they're there, and they may just be eating the plants. Sorry, skipped ahead a little too soon. May have been eating the plants and surviving on those, but it's apparently that's enough for such a large animal in such a dry and harsh environment. But another point to make is that this is, if we go back one more, this is half an hour later, not even, as you can see, and a little bit further inland, and you can see no clouds, no fog whatsoever. So that's how fast it changes, but it takes some time, and it definitely is sunnier, and the fog dissipates faster the further inland you get. So this is probably like 10 miles further in, maybe not even. The salt-tolerant plants? Oh, the guanaco, does it eat plants? Yes, of course. Succulents, whatever it finds. I've actually read about people complaining about there being too many guanacos because they would damage the delicate habitat and ecosystem, and they would even munch on some of the cacti. Because they don't care, if there is something that juicy, even if it means getting poked in the mouth, they'll do it. So from here, we move on to Taltal, a city that has many species named after it. This one is not one of them, but it is a giant Copiopoa, Copiopoa gigantea, also known as Copiopoa hasseltoniana. I may be wrong on this one again. That's what I found, and again, I don't really have a horse in this race. That's what I go with. But it truly is a massive plant. This was one of the largest ones that I could get to. Again, it's just pretty close to the ocean. Really old. I presume must be maybe even a couple hundred years old. That's what I've read people say, but this is just, you know, a quick estimation. And again, using my little distribution map here, we have a Eulychnia, and the distribution here makes it easier for us again. We see there is only one Eulychnia present between Taltal and Papaso, and it is indeed Eulychnia taltalensis. And locally, it would form something of a small forest. The plants could be up to, I want to say, like 8 feet tall, maybe. It's not very dense, but nevertheless, it appears to be a dominant on these hills here. So there must be enough moisture for this plant, and kind of like form small trees or shrubs, looking like something I want to say I've never seen before, but I've seen something similar in the Sonoran Desert, only a little taller. Let's try this. So the plants were actually at different stages of doing something else. Like this, you can see our fruits almost ready to open and spread the seeds. Some were actively growing, some were just getting ready to flower. So there must have been some moisture. As you can see, there are still clouds up in the air, so maybe it had rained not long ago, or who knows, maybe they can just do it feeding off the fog. And a little further inland, it gets hotter, it gets drier, and it gets empty. It gets empty to the point where there is, if you see a single wooden post a mile away, you will notice it, because it's the only thing to notice there. I mean, obviously there are rocks and stuff, but those kind of blend in after a while. So if you see one strange shape somewhere out there, it stands out like a sore thumb, just because it's so empty and so dry. There's some biocrust here and there, but not much else in terms of plant life. Until we get to Tocopilla in the Antofagasta region, somewhere here, which again, using our map, we can identify that this is Eulychnia iquicensis, as we are on our way to Iquique. And again, those plants form something of a small forest, even less dense. You can see a lot of failed plants, old plants fallen over, and it's probably just progressing drought due to the climate change, is just my quick guess. And, you know, like previously we saw lower down south, we saw that places close to the ocean received a reasonable amount of moisture. Here, we see almost none. We go straight from the ocean to the desert. And on top of that, we have the mountain, the coastal ranges really close to the ocean, which means whatever little moisture there is, it gets squeezed out really fast, really quickly, really close to the ocean, and almost nothing gets over the mountains or over the hills. But apparently, it's enough for Eulychnia iquicensis, which is one of the most drought-tolerant plants on the planet. It's enough for it somehow to survive. But as you notice, there's almost like a straight or clear line up here somewhere where life begins to take foot, and or at least Eulychnia can live. They can't live anywhere below, and I suspect this is because when there is fog, it probably starts out fairly high above the ground, so it never really touches the ground anywhere here. It only hits the hills over here, and that's where the moisture is squeezed out of the clouds or the fog. That's how those Eulychnias can survive there. Unfortunately, this was some kind of private land, and it may look close, but it was definitely several miles, so it would take hours of hiking up and down, and we simply did not have time for that. So unfortunately, I did not get to see Eulychnia iquicensis in person. But we did get to Iquique, which is a mining and port city pretty far north, somewhere up here in the Tarapacá region. From there, there's, the city itself, again, I'm not a city person, so I'm not going to talk much about that. We moved on almost immediately, moved inland and crossed the Pro Valley, and this is in the Andean foothills. It's already getting a little higher, and but still pretty hot. And the first thing that we saw, the first large cactus, was something that I probably didn't even know existed before. I knew about Hagioserius, but I didn't know this particular species. So it's a good thing I had the book with me because there was no service. So I quickly looked it up. The only thing that could have been was Hagioserius fascicularis. And here it is with human for scale. And you'll notice how desert-like this landscape is. There are some small leafy plants here, which tells me that, and the fact that this plant was, not this, but the previous plant was flowering, tells me that there must have been some moisture available recently. But other than that, it's pretty desert-like, pretty dry. And the temperature here is also very high, even though we're actually quite high above sea level, but it's probably the hottest place we've been so far in Chile. Another big surprise, Coriocactus brevistylus. This one I actually knew because the garden received a donation. This cactus was donated to the garden, and it definitely made a big impression on me because it had really long spines, and I didn't expect this species, which at the time I didn't even know, to have such long spines. I thought those were long spines, and then I saw this one, and these must be the longest spines on a cactus in the cactus world. Like, definitely over a foot long, and this probably wasn't even the longest one. I couldn't get to the trunk because of the spines blocking the way. So absolutely the longest spines. Not difficult to tell this species from other because it's such a distinct, large plant after all. However, there is one plant in that area which you could potentially mistake it for, and we'll get there soon. On our way to the foothills of the Andes, we met another species that I know Oreoserius, but I didn't know Oreoserius hempelianus, and we were fortunate enough to see them in flower. This is, it helped to narrow it down because this is a typical Oreoserius flower, which kind of resembles a Cleistocactus flower, which never opens, never truly opens. This opens a little more, but beautiful show in a beautiful place. This is a spot of, some sort of cultural significance to the Quechua people at almost 9,200 feet above sea level. But I was obviously all about the cacti on the hill. So much so that apparently later on when I came back home and started doing some research about this place, I looked it up and turns out there were some geoglyphs to be seen there. But unfortunately, I was too much preoccupied with looking for interesting cacti. I didn't see any of that, so I can't speak to that. There's definitely something there, and I like the sculptures, but I could not see the geoglyphs. So this is the city or town or settlement, Maminia, which I was originally a little afraid of, and that was the reason I didn't really book a hotel in that place, because I thought it would be some kind of rundown mining operation kind of thing, and boy, was I wrong. It's a complete opposite of what I thought it was. It's actually like an ancestral or a Native American kind of village it's basically dating back to pre-Columbian times. So there's like 550 people living there, most of them Quechua, and absolutely, amazing people. Nothing to do with mining. It's pretty high above sea level again, like over 9,000 feet. And I wish I could grow something like this in my front yard. And here we look at at Maminia from a viewpoint a little higher, 300 higher. Again, I was really wrong about that place. I probably should have booked a hotel in there. It would have been a better experience. Nevertheless, we still made it out there and got to eat some nice local meal. And another place of cultural significance which doubles as trailhead, Bagaza viewpoint at over 9,600 feet. So from here, we started moving down in search of the cactus we came there to find. It all looked very dry, except for some places, because you can't have fern this green and growing actively like this in a complete desert environment, so there must be some moisture lingering in those cracks on this side of the hill or this side of the boulder, especially when you see something like this, which looks almost slimy. I'm not even sure what this is. This is probably some kind of lichen. It literally looks wet. I'm not sure if it is, but yeah, there's definitely something odd going on in those crevices. And this is a funny story because when that Corio cactus that I mentioned before came to the garden, it was kind of a little infested with weeds, and this is, you know, all growers, I mean, most growers probably hate having weeds in their plants, in their pots. And here I am in the, you know, middle of habitat with the Corio cactus brevistylis growing in habitat with a bunch of oxalis. So finally, we started seeing something in the distance, Browningia candelaris, and growing on very steep slopes. You can actually see the creek. Well, you can't see the creek, but there's definitely a creek, and there's some terraces still remaining here. These were used. We saw some terraces still being used with corn growing in there, probably used by people from Maminia. But this is like, the creek was still running. Obviously, the whole area is very dry, very steep, and loose rock, quite difficult to get to my favorite plant. Especially when you have a bunch of Cumulopuntia spherica on your way, and it actually happened that I slipped, and this thing was just under my hand. I had to grab something, and I grabbed Cumulopuntia, which obviously just stitched my hand shut, and it took me like maybe 7 attempts to pull that thing out of my hand with the pliers, with a pair of pliers, and it took probably 2 weeks for all the spines, I think all of them, to eventually just make their way out of my hand. So have to be careful, but worth it for sure. This is the weirdest cactus I have ever seen. It has like 3 different growth types going on in the mature plant. I don't think, from what I hear, no one in the United States has a mature plant like this. All the plants that I know of are kind of, resemble kind of like a Pachycereus, so it's the first stage where it basically looks like a regular columnar cactus with spines and all. So I'm not sure how long it would take for this to get, to start looking like a proper, not Eulychnia, but Browningia, but here we are. This is why that's such a big deal for me. I believe those are birds' nests, and I will mention that later as well. I just wanted to talk a little bit about the genus Browningia, which apparently is polyphyletic, and Browningia candelaris and Hertingliana are closely related to each other, as well as to this some species of Rebudia. And for those of you who don't know, this is actually pretty strange because Rebudias are tiny. Like compared to these plants, I don't think they ever exceed like 3 or 4 inches in height, maybe exceptional specimens. Whereas the rest of the genus is more closely related to Pachycereus, which makes more sense because those are massive plants. And like Brian mentioned, there are, in fact, nests. I don't know if these are birds' nests or sometimes rodents will make similar nests and use them as trees, because these are the tallest plants in this area. So they basically occupy the same niche as a saguaro would in the Sonoran Desert. And in fact, many birds and mammals use saguaros as trees. They make holes in them, they build nests in there, they feed on them, and that's basically what it is to them. They don't care if we call them trees or not. I'm not sure if this is actually a hollow made by a bird or a rodent. It could be just a natural occurrence. It's quite possible that it just happened. I did not investigate it. This was like really steep here, so I couldn't get any closer to that. But definitely, you know, if you have something as tall as a tree, you can bet that it'll be used as a tree. And it is the tallest in there. And once again, Browningia candelaris, the plant that we traveled 1,500 miles across Chile to see. And the three distinct growth, I don't want to say patterns, but growth types on this plant are actually the tree-like trunk underneath, which has massive and long spines, presumably to protect it from grazing, or I haven't seen any large mammals there, but who knows. Then we start seeing those side arms, which are completely naked. There's no spines whatsoever, just this beautiful pattern. And the new growth kind of resembles what you can see on top of Carnegie gigantea, or the saguaro cactus, with some spines still there. I'm guessing that they later fall out and they start resembling those naked arms. This is kind of like corking. That's what I'm seeing here. This here. Oh, the green. Oh, there's probably some farina there. So it's this protective waxy coating. Yeah. And I haven't grown this species from seed, so I can't tell exactly what the seedling is. It could be Browningia, it could be Coreocactus, it could even be the Oreocereus. But nevertheless, it's growing under the Browningia, and nice to see young seedlings actively growing, whatever this is. And I actually did know this species for once, Oreocereus leucotrichus. You can find this in the roof Bancroft garden. It grows differently because plants in gardens have purposes they have to obey. They can't just sprawl and take over, so they kind of have to be kept nice and tidy. This thing can do whatever it wants, and even though I stuck my face in there because I was taking a selfie here, so it may not seem like it's a big plant, but it was definitely something around 20 feet long, sprawling along the hill here, and with really nice and stout spines overlooking this beautiful valley. Here we have another Coreocactus brevistylis, this time a crested specimen overlooking the same valley, very close to that Oreocereus. So from there, we move on to San Pedro de Atacama with some nice dust devils and snowy peaks in the background. It's kind of a touristy town with a lot of amenities and a lot of things catered to tourists. This, by the way, is the llama, so it's the domesticated relative of the guanaco, a little, well, actually much larger. San Pedro is quite high in the Andes, but not that high, and the temperatures can still be pretty high there. It gets pretty hot, and they, in fact, have their own Death Valley, otherwise known as the Mars Valley as well. It's similarly to ours, is very dry, very sandy, not as hot because it's higher, and it has similar genera of plants growing there too, one of them being Ephedra chilensis. But we're moving on a little higher up, over 10,000 feet in elevation. We're starting to see a new genus, Maiwaniopsis kamachoi, and as you can see, very nice and long spines on this specimen. The blade on this knife is about like 4 inches long, so I'm guessing this is somewhere between 4.5 to 5 inches long spines. Absolutely fantastic ball of spines. And another iconic species of the Atacama Desert, Trichoceres atacamensis, otherwise known as Echinopsis, now maybe even Leucostella. I'm going to stick with Trichoceres because it's been known as such for a very long time. And absolute giants. Here's my Y for scale. So these definitely start to look like saguaros in the Sonoran Desert, definitely rival that plant when it comes to its height and general volume as well. And as in the case of many cacti, these are also steep slope specialists. For some reason, I'm not quite sure, there must be something to do with water movement under the surface. I'm not exactly certain what it is, fast drainage, but we're in the desert, so do you really need to get rid of the water that quickly? I'm not sure. But that's what they do. They like to grow on steep slopes. Most cacti, many cacti do. Here we have a nice little creek running through the Valle de los Cactus, which is basically the Cactus Valley. And the spines at the bottom of those giants are still pretty stout, thick, and long. But as we go higher towards the meristem, they start to change. And apparently, it makes more sense for a cactus this high to protect that growth tip from the harsh UV. And it looks like it's better to grow something more similar to hairs, trichomes, more fuzzy, more white. I guess it's just good to have a sunscreen at that elevation. And I took this picture specifically to kind of like take a note for myself so I don't forget. It's late summer, afternoon, and at this elevation, the temperature is only 70 degrees Fahrenheit. I don't think it ever gets much hotter than this, even though, several, like in San Pedro at 8,000 feet of elevation, it may be 90 degrees. It's much, much cooler up here. It's even cooler when you go to 13,000 feet of elevation to the Los Flamencos National Reserve, where you can find larger animals, including 2 species of flamingos and vicuña, which is a wild relative of the domesticated alpaca. And still pretty high in the mountains, we see something that I didn't even know existed. It kind of looks like some of those bunch grasses. And from a distance, you might actually mistake it for one, or might not even pay attention to it at all. Cumulopuntia ignescens, or Cumulopuntia boliviana, subspecies ignescens. And you have to get really up close and personal to see that under those spines indeed is a plant. Another completely unexpected find. I was just wandering around aimlessly, looking for whatever, because I didn't know what to expect. And here I am, walking up on this beautiful Sorenzia formosa, also known as Lobelia formosa, which is a very interesting story, because this plant does so well in our climate here, even in Walnut Creek. And then when you think about how different this climate is to the climate in Walnut Creek, it's not quite the polar opposite or anything, but it never gets as hot. It never rains as much. The air is literally so dry that my nose was bleeding. It's completely, it's completely different from what we experience here in winter. And yet, this is one of the toughest and most successful plants I've seen people grow anywhere in Bay Area. Something happened here, but it's all good. It healed up, and this thing is in fact growing new arms. And several hundred miles down south, we see the same species of Oreoceres leucotrichus. Here it looks a little different. It's a little fuzzier, a little more compact. Nevertheless, again, beautiful spines. Definitely the same species, even though the habitat must be slightly different and environmental pressures make it look slightly different. Maybe it's just genetic. And that's not the end of the trip, but that's unfortunately all we have time for today. We basically traveled from Antofagasta back to the coast and followed the coast, saw plenty of different plants, many of which I still haven't even identified because they're so weird and I can't even find information on that now. But they're there, and I didn't think I should just skip over them simply because I didn't know what they were just yet, or simply because I ran out of time. Many cacti, some of which I already know, many I've never seen before. So if there is appetite for part 2, we'll do part 2. Thank you very much, and hopefully see you next time.